That was the best feeling when I found my trap with some lobster in it.
Tonight, we meet a Mi'kmaq fisher who's looking for her traps while still harvesting lobster.
Jake was out there getting meat for his family, and we know what happened. And so for us, it's a way of how do we support that young family.
And the Metis Nation of Alberta hosts a fundraiser for the families of 2 Métis hunters. Good evening, I'm Brittany Hobson. We begin tonight in southern Nova Scotia, where the Mi'kmaq Nation have shown up en masse to support Sabaganegade First Nation. Angel Moore has this update.
This is the moment Cheyenne Francis, known as Awesome Awesome, found her lobster trap. Only one trap of the string of traps that had been cut.
That was the best feeling when I found my trap with some lobster in it. Oh my good Lord. And I was the only boat to find a pot.
This is St. Mary's Bay over a week ago after Sabaganegade First Nation launched their own moderate livelihood fishery plan. Mi'kmaq boats were surrounded by commercial fishing boats. Traps were cut and stolen. With each trap costing about $200, the loss can quickly add up.
I haven't found any of my gear. That's thousands of dollars down the drain and to build myself back up. And it's pretty sad that we gotta do that.
Chiefs from New Brunswick and Prince Edward Island came to Saulnier Wharf to offer support. Chief George Ganesh says the Mi'kmaq Nation is gaining strength.
We see this as a flashpoint. There's no going back. We're not prepared to endure poverty anymore.
Chief Darlene Bernard of Lennox Island says her community is hoping to launch their own moderate livelihood fishery next spring.
It's the federal government who has not come to the table in a true and meaningful way to work with the First Nations to gain our livelihood through the fishery. That's not happened. There's been no true negotiation on the part of the federal government.
Francis says she will keep looking for her traps and harvesting lobster.
And to practice our rights, our treaty rights. This is what we've been born into.
Sabaganegade First Nation meet this week with Canada as negotiations continue to implement the Moderate Livelihood Fishery Management Plan. Angel Moore, APTN National News, Saulnier Wharf.
The dispute in Nova Scotia reached the floor of the House of Commons today. During question period, Nova Scotia Conservative MP Chris de Tremont asked about it. He went after Fisheries and Oceans Minister Bernadette Jordan, accusing her of leaving non-Indigenous fishers in the dark while negotiations to end the dispute continue.
Conflict resolution requires an honest and transparent communication with both sides in a dispute. Mr. Speaker, when will the Minister of Fisheries do her job, show some leadership and respect, and open a true dialogue with all parties for a lasting solution?
Minister. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, as I've said from the beginning of this crisis in Nova Scotia, our main priority is keeping people safe. To that end, Mr. Speaker, I believe that the path forward is through honest, respectful and collaborative dialogue. I have met with both First Nations and industry partners over the last number of weeks to find that path forward. We are committed to making sure that we implement the treaty rights that are guaranteed to the First Nations under the Marshall Decision. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The Metis Nation of Alberta hosted a fundraiser breakfast in 2 locations to raise money for the families of Jacob Sanson and Maurice Cardinal. The 2 Métis men were shot and killed while hunting this past March. Chris Stewart was there and brings us this.
20. Jacob Sansom and Maurice Cardinal were shot and killed near Glendon, Alberta, while out hunting. 2 men were charged in their deaths and will be going to trial for second-degree murder. But the families of the 2 Métis hunters have to deal with their loss. And that's why Métis Nation of Alberta staff and volunteers were busy at their Edmonton headquarters and in Bonnyville, preparing a breakfast feast. The $10 charge for the meal will be going towards helping the families of Sansom and Cardinal. Audrey Portra is the president of the Métis Nation of Alberta. She says the families are struggling with their deaths.
Jake was out there getting meat for his family, and we know what happened. And so for us, it's a way of how do we support that young family, the mother and the 3 children? How do we find a way to continue supporting them until they get their lives to a place where they can support themselves again?
Gina Lavaseur is Jacob Sansom's sister and Maurice's niece. She and Sarah Sansom, Jacob's wife, were here in Edmonton. Both were thankful to the MNA and others for their help.
See all of our leaders come out and, support my family. It means so much, so much. And I'm so honored and thankful for the Metis Association. They've been lifting us up and supporting us. First Nations, all of the communities that come out, the chiefs, the leaders, everyone that's come out to these events, they've been nothing but supportive.
Sarah Sampson says the money will help keep a roof over her and her 3 children's heads. She told APTN the money will also help with travel expenses to St. Paul, Alberta next October, when the second-degree murder trial begins for Roger Bilodeau and his son, Anthony Bilodeau.
8 hours away from home, so I'm going to be up north for a whole month. And so all of this is going to help for that part.
Chris Stewart, APTN National News, Edmonton.
There was a horrific crash in Winnipeg's North End over the weekend. A 30-year-old woman was killed and her partner and 2 young children were seriously injured. It involved 2 men in a half-ton truck who sped off onto a side street when city police tried to pull them over for a traffic stop. A short distance away, it slammed into a van driven by Jennifer Deathmers. 43-year-old Armand Joseph Chartrand is facing several charges, including causing death by criminal negligence. None of the charges have been proven in court, and he remains in custody. A vigil for Deathmers will be held at the scene of the accident on Tuesday. 2 Northern First Nations in Manitoba announced they have confirmed cases of COVID-19 in their communities. This is the first time the virus has made its way into Northern First Nations in the province since the pandemic started. York Factory First Nation, located approximately 700 kilometers north of Winnipeg, announced they have 7 confirmed cases, all of which are part of one household. The family traveled to Winnipeg for a medical appointment, and it is believed they came in contact with a positive case in the city. Tatasquat Cree Nation is the second community with confirmed cases. Manitoba's Chief Public Health Officer addressed the new cases in York Factory.
All the First Nations, they've had these pandemic plans in place. They work with FNIB, they also with a number of organizations with it, so plans are in place. What's being done was really done on, late last week when those rapid tests came back, is the case identification, isolation, contact investigation, and isolation, and a search for further contact. So that's the main, work of public health.
Time now for a quick break. Coming up, an in-depth look at the lasting impacts of the so-called Oka crisis 30 years later. Here is Tuesday's weather forecast beginning on the East Coast. 22 above in Halifax, 25 degrees in Charlottetown, 11 above in Happy Valley Goose Bay, 15 degrees in La Grande River, cloudy and 23 in Quebec City, 15 in Val d'Or, 17 and a mix of sun and cloud in Toronto, 16 in London, 16 degrees in Elliott Lake and Sudbury, 11 in Wawa, in northern Manitoba, 9 above in Pecatowagan and God's Lake. Some sun and 19 in Brandon and Dauphin. In Saskatchewan, 20 above in Saskatoon, 17 degrees in Yorkton, 13 with some sun in La Ronge, 10 degrees in Stony Rapids. Welcome back. 30 years ago, the Oka crisis ignited an international media firestorm. Community members called the coverage sensationalism or racism. Tonight, an encore presentation of Lindsay Richardson's story of how 4 Mohawk Nation members are still trying to change that image.
We're tired of that. We're taking a stand, and this is what they give us.
I've done it for 30 years, every single anniversary. So the people who are interviewing me, they could just go back from the year after, 10 years later, and I'm saying the same thing.
We've tried to talk to them, and our voice is falling on deaf ears.
Our words fall on deaf ears. And that includes the media. It's kind of frustrating on my side that I have to keep doing this and reiterating, this is our land. It was never given up. This land is being stolen right from under us.
They want people to get hurt over a golf course. Native people are fed up.
According to Canada's history books, it was around this time 30 years ago the 78-day siege known as the Oka Crisis came to an end. But for the Mohawks at Ganazadage, the fight for land and title didn't end when the cameras turned off or when the mainstream media stopped paying attention.
They show in how they present their stories that they actually have no understanding of the profound and deeply multi-generational conflict that exists here, and that it's really about the land.
In 2020, community members are resisting construction at a development site on unceded land. But without the media draw of the 1990 crisis, Ellen now resorts to her own means to get the message out.
Second, Wacha, Walalan, bonjour. My name is Gazitsagwas Ellen Gabriel, and I'm here at the illegal development site.
The videos often garner hundreds, sometimes thousands of hits.
Social media has been used quite powerfully by the youth, and I saw that Live was getting a lot of attention, and people could tell their story with their own voices. I spend hours or time with the media to explain to them, and they show 3 seconds. I figured social media is the best place to have our voices really heard and understood by everybody who's interested in the truth. This is pavement. Perhaps that belongs to the municipality of Oka, but the ground underneath belongs to us. And that's it. It's very difficult. The media doesn't get it. We're still viewed as a very divided community. We're still viewed as being the radicals, and I'm still happy to be called a radical.
Believe it or not, I was called a radical a long time ago. So I didn't know I was insulted or not. And I looked up radical, and radical says returning to roots or returning to fundamentals. And so I don't have a problem with us being called radical, because that's what we are.
Kenneth Deere played media point person for just 3 days in 1990, but learned quickly what story reporters were interested in.
They tried to find weaknesses and try to distract the issue. Say, well, is it really about the land, or is it about cigarettes, or about something else? The media seemed to be focusing on guns and masked warriors and wearing camouflage. And that wasn't really the issue.
And this ain't a surrender either.
Once the siege ended, there was struggle to set the record straight.
I remember in the past, you would, if you put an op-ed in a paper and you asked to be paid for it, they'd say, well, you should just be grateful that it's being published,
Deere's not the only one critical of the media treatment of 1990. The book Seeing Red examines 400 years of Canadian newspaper coverage. Of Oka, it says. For the first time, a sustained counter-narrative emerged, one which engaged and challenged colonialism fully. But it was difficult to hear amidst the roar of colonial-style reportage. Not much Indigenous journalism existed at the time of the 1990 siege. 2 years later, that would change.
I had no money, but I had some friends and acquaintances and a couple of enemies, and we got together and we all agreed, came to a consensus that yes, let's have a newspaper.
In January 1992, the Eastern Door was born.
There was only like 1,500 domiciles here, but I was selling like 2,000 or 3,000 papers. And other people have told me that the Eastern Door helped heal the community in that time of recovery from the crisis.
Dr. Deere has made his mark in many areas, including education, the media, and the international politics.
Last year, Deere was recognized by the Quebec government for his contributions to journalism. In turn, he recognizes a new generation of Indigenous journalists.
There's a tremendous interest now in in journalism that wasn't there before. It takes practice. Very few people are born journalists. You have to practice journalism.
Colonialism has taught us, to destroy ourselves. 1990, I was 14 years old, and I was just kind of coming into my own, and it was like it fast forwarded my whatever I was, whatever my persona was, whatever I thought I'd be. It was like, boom, here we go. You're going to be this now. You have no choice.
Steve Bonspiel is now the editor-publisher of The Eastern Door. But the Indigenous journalism class he teaches at Concordia University is so popular, he says it filled to capacity minutes after opening for registration.
One of the main things I tell them is you're not going to be able to learn 500 years of colonialism that is on our shoulders, but you better damn well learn about that story that you're covering.
Besieged warriors have repeatedly taunted the military. This one tossing flares at two soldiers standing guard overnight.
As a teen, Bonspiel was marked by how his home community, Ganazadage, was depicted in the mainstream.
It was hard to get a fair story. I mean, I was pretty young, so to me, all coverage was biased because I could see. 6 o'clock news, I'd pick apart. Oh, they're using Indian again. Oh, they said, this, they use these words. They don't care because they're not catering to us as viewers. They don't even care that we're watching.
The soldiers showed restraint as individuals taunted them, swore at them, and then began jostling the troops.
Today, he's teaching a new crop, the Indigenous style guide of reporting as he sees it.
I think that the sickness that happens too in mainstream is you forget about our communities until there's something big that happens. APTN changed that.
It's been just over a year since the official birth of Nunavut.
10 years after the siege, the world's first ever Indigenous broadcaster, APTN, made its debut. Dan David, APTN's first news director, is from Ganazadage. We asked if the 1990 occupation at all influenced his leadership at the time.
Everything had everything to do with it. It's not just because you're hiring people who are brown and red and, other color under the rainbow. It's the fact that you've got people who are questioning not just outside, not just Canada or whatever province they happen to be reporting in, but they're questioning themselves. And I think that that's critical. Way back, like about 40 years, we understood that there had to be a change. There had to be a change in the newsrooms itself. We needed to have Indigenous voices. And that's really what I think the Oka crisis was all about, wanting to be heard, demanding to be heard and understood.
Making change in the media major leagues takes time, but in the 30 years since the standoff, the communities involved have mobilized. Kahnawake now has 2 weekly newspapers and a radio station operating on the territory. Bonspiel had plans to launch a paper in Ganazadage in 2020 until COVID hit.
This is RKR 101.7 FM, reviving Ganazadage Radio.
But even during quarantine, the community managed to get their radio station back on the air.
They need as many outlets, creatively, expressively, anything to get them out there to say, we are proud and you should support us because we're not just about the crisis. We're a living, breathing, caring community that wants to move forward.
The Vian Commission final report backs this up. Although media is slowly improving their response, it found, quote, the problem lies in the persistence of certain ideological biases, which many believe were reinforced by the events at Oka in the early 1990s. The report itself might not offer the framework needed to force improvements to news coverage, but at least in some parts of the Mohawk Nation, the improvements have already come from within. Lindsay Richardson, APTN National News, Jojage, Montreal.
We head to Nunavut, where the Legislative Assembly is back for a special sitting. More on that after the break. Here's the rest of Tuesday's weather forecast, picking back up in northern Alberta. Sunny skies and 14 in Fort McMurray, 16 in Grand Prairie. Sun and 23 in Lethbridge, 22 above in Medicine Hat. Over to the west coast, sunny skies for Kamloops and 26, 23 in Victoria, 12 in rain in Smithers, 17 in Prince George. In the Yukon, 11 above in Watson Lake and Whitehorse. Over to the NWT, 8 degrees in Yellowknife, sun in Trout Lake and 16, 6 above in Colville Lake, 2 degrees in Sax Harbor. In Nunavut, 4 degrees in Arviat, Whale Cove, Chesterfield, and Baker Lake. -1 in Iqaluit, and -1 in sun in Cape Dorset. And now we look north to Iqaluit, where Nunavut remains the one part of Canada without any positive cases of COVID-19. Nunavut reporter Kent Driscoll joins us now. Welcome, Kent. I understand the Legislative Assembly came back for a special sitting and it ends tomorrow. It must be pretty different there with the COVID restrictions in place.
Thanks. The Legislative Assembly is back, and it is very different than before. The spring session was canceled back in March due to COVID-19 travel restrictions. Physically, the Assembly is drastically different. They've closed the visitors gallery, and in that area, they've put extra desks for the MLAs to provide for more social distancing. They don't have to sit so close to each other now. Now, the questions are what you would expect from the Nunavut Legislative Assembly. What happens to schools if COVID reaches a small community? There are many questions about the 2-week mandatory quarantine Nunavut residents have to go through before returning to the territory, and even more about the essential workers who are not required to go through those 2 weeks. On the list of people who don't have to quarantine, the MLAs themselves. The MLAs have an exemption to the COVID-19 lockdown. Now, the regular members of the Assembly took to the floor this week to tell the government they would not be using their special exemption. And the government confirmed no Nunavut politician has used that exemption yet. There's also a meeting taking place this week in North Baffin Island that has going to have a major impact on the area. The Nunavut Impact Review Board is meeting in Pond Inlet to discuss a proposed expansion of the Mary River iron ore mine. Here's the thing. Only 50 people are allowed in that community hall in Pond Inlet at the same time due to the COVID restrictions. 33 of those spots are taken up by Nunavut Impact Review Board members, staff, and technical workers, meaning only 17 people from Pond Inlet can access that community center for the meetings at one given time. The Pond Inlet Hunters and Trappers Association is not pleased with this turn of events, and we've been in discussions with them. Another issue in front of the Assembly, the ongoing attempt to bring civilian oversight into Nunavut's RCMP. And that really came out over the weekend with 2 different stories we're looking at. 4 former Nunavut RCMP officers have filed suit in federal court saying that while they were working in Nunavut, they said they were undergoing post-traumatic stress disorder due to the high rate of crime that they deal with here, and that their officers and their co-workers belittled them and blackballed them because they wouldn't just go back to work after suffering PTSD. Then, over the weekend, 4 Iqaluit RCMP officers drew their weapon on a young Inuk man who fit the description of someone they were looking for. Here's the thing. Here's the description. The description was a young Inuk man in camouflage pants with a rifle. In this town, that's not a description. That's a uniform. So I've requested to speak with the head of Iqaluit's V Division RCMP to try and get to the bottom of that. And that's what's going on here, and those are the stories I'll be following this week. Back to you in Winnipeg.
Hey, thanks for that update, Kent. And that's all your APTN National News for this Monday, September 28th. Find more Indigenous news at aptnnews.ca or on Facebook and Twitter at APTN News. I'm Brittany Hubson. Have a great evening.